So today I thought it would be a fabulous idea to tell you about some of my favourite and least favourite things about being an assistant psychologist. So just to give you some context, I used to work as an AP in an honorary capacity with the NHS, and that was for about just over a year, and that was part-time as well. I then applied for and got a full-time position as an AP with a private company, and I stayed there for about 7 months. So that's me, that's my experience, just under 2 years as an AP and not full-time the whole way through. Just to clarify, I am no longer an AP. I am also definitely not on the doctorate. I have not applied for the doctorate before. I have no experience with any of that. But yeah, basically whenever I talk to people who are not in psychology and I tell them what I do, their response is usually something along the lines of, oh wow, and is that something you enjoy doing? And I find it really hard to answer that question because yes, there are some really great things to being an AP, but at the same time there are some less desirable aspects of the job, shall we say. And I don't think people talk about it enough, especially when the role is so over glamorized and so competitive at the same time. So yeah, that's what we're here to do today. Probably shouldn't even have to put this caveat out there, but this is just my experience in the services that I worked with. There are thousands and thousands of services across the country, serving hundreds of different client groups. So my experience is by no means generalizable to everybody. So let's start with the positives. My ultimate favorite thing about being an AP was really anything that was patient focused or client centered. So that could be direct client facing work like running an assessment, observations, interventions, any kind of group work. Those were literally the parts of the job that I lived for. I really liked that feeling of being on the ground, down in the depths with somebody else, just thinking about what's going on for them, information gathering, problem solving, working through barriers together, basically figuring out how I can be of service to this person and how I can contribute to improving their quality of life. I loved doing all of that. It really got my blood pumping. I also really enjoyed the less obvious parts. So that could be things like a lot of indirect work with the people around them. So people like support workers, families. I also did a fair bit of reading and looking up particular interventions. The client group that I last worked with had a tendency to display a lot of long-term challenging behaviours, and sometimes it's useful to revisit interventions that have worked in the past, but sometimes when those strategies no longer work for whatever reason, it is really helpful to do a deep dive into the literature just to see if anything new has cropped up or if there was anything that we missed as a team. So that would usually fall on me as the AP to do. So yeah, anything that was client-centered or patient-focused, that to me was truly the best part of being an AP. So the next best thing about being an AP to me was actually the amount of autonomy that I got in the job. So I actually last worked in social care in residential settings. Although I would be working with a large team of support workers and the people who run the home, I sometimes would be the only clinician on site, and I was definitely most of the time the only representative from psychology. So there was a level of isolation that came with that, and that was actually quite daunting, especially when I first started. But I actually really grew to like the autonomy and the independence that comes with that. I got to structure my days and my weeks however I wanted. I liaised with people independently. I got to run most of the analyses and interventions that I thought was appropriate, obviously with approval from a consultant CP. But for the most part, I got to do what I thought was right, and that really helped me develop skills to think and act independently as a clinician. The flip side to that was that to some extent there would be a lack of support and direction. So like I said earlier, sometimes I may be the only clinician on the ground, and if anything happens, I'm the main point of contact for the MDT, and as a junior clinician, that felt like a lot of responsibility to begin with. I would also say that I had fairly limited guidance on what to do within the role, so I had to pick things up very quickly on my own. I also had to learn a lot of technical, clinical terms that were really not part of my previous psychological lexicon. So and not just learn these terms, but really have a proper understanding of what they mean, so when I talk to people, I actually know what the hell I'm talking about. And I know these are things that come with any job, really. I just found it particularly difficult in this AP role because of that lack of structure and lack of guidance. So yeah, it did take a bit of reflective practice to figure out what I was meant to do and how I can best serve the client group that I worked with. I would say I did have a really good supervisor and a really competent MDT around me, but it is just the nature of the role that you can feel quite isolated sometimes. Got sidetracked, but back to the positives. So speaking of MDT, one of my favourite things was actually working alongside a multidisciplinary team of clinicians, so occupational therapists, speech and language therapists. I think we had a psychiatrist and obviously a consultant clinical psychologist and 2 other APs that I worked with. So when I first started, I wasn't particularly familiar with these other disciplines and what they did. So it was very, very fascinating learning about different aspects of clinical work outside of psychology. A lot of the cases that I worked also really needed an MDT approach. So it was really useful to have these people around me and we brainstorm solutions together. I also really enjoyed working with the other APs on the team. There wasn't much overlap in terms of clinical caseload, but we did a bunch of different service-related things, including a piece of research that we had to disguise as a service evaluation for bureaucratic reasons. I think we just worked really well as a team. We were so supportive of each other. We all kind of had the similar dry sense of humour. And yeah, I absolutely loved working with them. The next best thing about being an AP was the CPD days that I got. So all of the APs at the company that I used to work with would attend training sessions every month, and these are usually run by qualified CPs, and each month there would be a different topic. A lot of these were actually psychological approaches or just things in psychology that were outside the scope of what I did as an AP. So for example, off the top of my head, we had sessions on things like mindfulness, eating disorders, functional neurological disorders. We also had one on like the psychodynamic approach, which I legit thought was going to be like a Freudian fest, but it wasn't. It actually turned out to be quite an interesting session, and it was very modern and had more updated research. I got to learn about a lot of different psychological approaches and interventions and different client groups that I've never worked with in my life. To me, that was really interesting and I really enjoyed those days. So now we're going to go into what I perceive to be the less pleasant parts of being an AP. And again, this is just my experience. I am going to speak quite candidly. So worst thing number 1, by far, the number 1 thing that I disliked the most about being an assistant psychologist was having a really low salary. There's really no other way to put it. I think if you work for the NHS, it's a bit better and you get a better pension. But some of the private companies that I've seen so far, I mean, oh my God, I'm quite unashamed to talk about money. So I'm quite happy to let people know that I was working full-time as an AP for what was the equivalent of the NHS Agenda for Change Band 2 salary. So this was with a private company, as I mentioned, but the NHS Band 2 was the equivalent of what I got working that job. For comparison, if you work with the NHS, AP positions are typically Band 4 and very, very occasionally Band 5. I really need to say this. I am and I was very grateful to be able to work that job. I was very privileged to be in a position where I could take that job and still survive. So I was very, very lucky in that aspect. Also, as someone who is not from the UK, that opportunity was nothing short of life-changing. So I'm very, very grateful for that. Also, let me be crystal clear, there is absolutely no shame whatsoever in earning a Band 2 salary. But given the competitiveness of the role, the number of degrees and accolades and experience that you need under your belt in order to even have a chance at securing a paid full-time AP role, I guess I just came out of that experience feeling really disillusioned. And ultimately it wasn't really for me long term. So when a better opportunity came along, I couldn't see any alternative to leaving, really. The next thing that I disliked about being an AP was the lack of accessible options in terms of career progression. So a lot of APs, dare I say all APs, would work the AP role because they want to get on the clinical doctorate, which is pretty much one of the only pathways to become a clinical psychologist in the UK at the moment. But because DClin Psych courses offer paid positions that are obviously limited by nature, not trying to state the obvious, but not everyone gets onto the course. So that basically means there are a lot of people who are working Band 4 AP positions or Band 2 equivalent if you were like me, while they continuously try to apply for doctorate year after year, hoping to get a place. So in terms of progression, there are some AP roles that are offered at Band 5, but again, these are very rare. You need a lot of experience to get onto those roles, and they are just generally quite competitive. There is also a new role in England, which I think is called the Associate Clinical Psychologist, Clinical Associate Psychologist. But again, same problem, very competitive and fairly obscure, very difficult to find. There are other roles out there as well, like PWP and EMHP, but these tend to move away from the clinical doctorate ever so slightly, although you can still apply for the doctorate if you're working those roles. But again, surprise, surprise, let's say altogether, very competitive. I kind of get the sense that most APs that I know of are not particularly gunning for those roles anyway. The APs I know are APs because they want to get onto the doctorate. And I suppose from that point of view, if the doctorate is the only progression that you are considering, then it can be quite difficult. For me personally, it is a bit depressing because I don't even qualify for funding, so that option's not even on the table for me. So this segues really nicely into my next and final point, which is I really dislike how being an AP is literally all about the doctorate. Expectations about the doctorate, conversations about the doctorate, supervision sessions about the doctorate. I think I'm just being a little bit bitter because if I qualified for funding and I had the opportunity to even apply for the doctorate, I think I would jump on that fanatical bandwagon as well. But because I don't even have that option, it's at best mildly irritating and at worst flat out soul-sucking. Anyway, those are the best and worst parts about being an AP for me. I'd like to point out that I am very aware that the worst parts that I've listed are very much things that need to be addressed at a systemic level, so it's no one person's fault really. And finally, at the end of the day, I did enjoy working as an AP very, very much. I'm very grateful, very lucky, and I did move on to something else that I do really enjoy now, so I can't really complain too much. That is pretty much it from me. Thank you so much for watching. If you're an AP, I would love to hear from you. Do you agree? Do you disagree with any of the points that I've listed? What has your experience been like? If you are an aspiring AP, I would also love to hear from you. Why do you want to be an AP? Is there anything in particular that you're looking forward to? Do you have any doubts or fears that you want to share? Leave all of that down in the comments below. I would really appreciate it. If you are not an AP and you are not an aspiring AP but you have thoughts, well, I love thoughts, so please feel free to share them down in the comments below, and I will see you there. Have a wonderful day, everybody. Bye.